Shai is the former executive director of the World Jewish Congress, and he joins me now live from New York. Thanks so much for speaking to us here on TRT World. It is incredible, the statistics. According to French police, the number of anti-Semitic attacks registered by them was up around 70% in 2018 compared to the previous year. You know, why is this happening, and who's doing this?
Well, there is, as the European Union's monitoring group attested in its report, there is an increase in right-wing activity. There is also an increase in different other groups, such as some of the Muslims who've been living in France for decades. This is all it's the general trend lines actually interrelate, because the right wing, as you know, the right wing party, the National Front in France, has continued to be a strong political movement, and they have been deriving additional momentum from the inflaming of tensions against immigrants. And then Muslims are identified as immigrants. That pushes some Muslims feel then more excluded, more isolated, and it makes that riper for them to be recruited directly or to be inspired, as we call lone wolves, to commit attacks and vandalism and things like that. The situation in the Middle East, I think, can also have an impact in terms of the rise and fall of the trend. It can make it more appealing to some people to take matters into their own hands. I think the embassy move to Jerusalem probably had the biggest impact on Muslims generally. Whether they move that into violence or expressions of hatred, that's another story. But the right-wing groups are unified really across Europe politically. Yeah. They're either unified directly or at least they're on the same page.
And Shai, I want to ask you about a police unit of hate crimes that France announced yesterday that it's creating. Do you think this is going to be effective? Is it enough? Too little, too late even?
I don't know that it's enough. I think France has had, even on the ministerial level, task forces which have been effective in the past. And I think this will be very effective. But policing, it's not just a matter of enforcing laws. It's a matter of outreach to different disaffected groups. It's a matter of monitoring carefully what politicians say, and also outside politicians, including Russia, which has been feeding as we know, well, I can make a case that Russia has been feeding a lot of the influx of Arab and Muslim immigrants from the Middle East and from North Africa, and trying to fund and in other ways support the right-wing politicians across Europe, and interdicting that could also be very helpful. So policing is not enough, but it's definitely an important step.
And that brings me on to my next point, because it isn't just France. We've seen in the UK the Labour Party being accused of being anti-Semitic and much more.
Yes, and it's not just that it's being accused, it's that the leader, particularly the leader of the Labour Party, has been very reluctant to directly condemn anti-Semitism, to directly condemn members of the Labour Party who have engaged in public expressions of anti-Semitism and discrimination. And while Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, has been critical of Israel in support of the Palestinian movement and other groups, it is possible to do that and also condemn anti-Semitism and make sure that the people that he supports in those causes are not the people that are also promoting anti-Semitic tropes and messages. And he hasn't done that. That's not even an accusation. That's demonstrable. But I think in a normal year, he might be held to account for this. But with the upcoming election in England being more about Brexit than about anything else, I think that the anti-Semitism issue is becoming complicated. But what it has done is it has moved the British Jewish community to feel really excluded for the first time by one of the major political parties.
That's very sad indeed. And apart from the British Jewish Society, what about other Jewish societies in Europe, and particularly France, which has, I believe, the biggest Jewish, and Germany in Europe.
Yeah, well, I should say one of the most important trend lines that we see is that civil society in these countries has been steadfastly on the side of Jews and particularly Jews, but also other minorities that are being discriminated against and are being targeted. So that's very helpful. I don't see a mass migration of British Jews or French Jews at this time. And if they were to migrate, it's not clear where they would move to. Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel has he went to Paris a few years ago and he basically campaigned for Jews to move to Israel, and they pretty much they directly rejected that by singing the Marseillaise, the French national anthem, to his face. But I don't think, in general, I don't think that Jews leaving their nations of origin, where they've grown up and everything for generations, is positive for anyone. And I don't think that, even though if you have several 100,000 Jews in France and we have several thousand every year who are leaving, that is not a major trend. But I think that the Jews do feel threatened. They feel that maybe the government and the police are taking more steps to protect them, and civil society continues to welcome them. But they've been through this before, and the biggest mistake we can make is to report this story as some kind of a new development in Europe, as though you're showing some medieval architecture there. Anti-Semitism in Europe has very old roots, and those roots have nothing to do with Islam, and they have nothing to do with well, maybe a little to do with the Russians, but not the current Russians. So this is fertile ground for anti-Semitism. And Jews, even the Jews who live in Europe and are committed to the future of Europe, are still very much aware of that every day.
Shai Franklin, it has been a pleasure to speak to you here on the NewsHour on TRT World. Thank you so much for your time.